Tonight, as you know, we have whole food, plant-based eating. And before we begin, what I thought I'd do is just start with a very quick quote from somebody who we lost on 26th of December last year. He said, "There comes a point where we need to stop just pulling people out of the river. We need to go upstream and find out why they're falling in." And that was from Desmond Tutu. Well, without that, and to hand it over to what, we're here tonight to discuss what to do to stop getting sick from COVID-19. Dr. Mark Craig is our first speaker. Mark, if you're good to go, it'd be fantastic to let you roll. So I'll let you take it over.
Thanks, Peter. Great to see so many people here tonight. That's a very kind introduction. Let me just share my screen and then we'll get going. Okay. Go. Thumbs up if you can see the pictures. Good stuff. And from me as well. Yeah. The idea behind having, we might need to mute everyone else actually. The idea behind having this talk and this evening, let me just get my pictures, there we go. It's been brewing for a few months. I'm speaking to you live from MIQ Hotel, pretty much COVID central for the last 18 months or so. Still on shift till 8 o'clock. It's really born of the idea. We're obviously plant-based, passionate lifestyle practitioners. You may know about EBE, you may all be members or not. It's great to have everyone here regardless. We're in the middle of a pandemic. It's finally hit New Zealand. It's been all around the world. We've had the opportunity, we've been very lucky, thanks to the border closures and everything, depending on how you feel about it. I know that there'll be sort of mixed feelings, but of watching the rest of the world and how they've coped with COVID or not coped with COVID-19 disease. And we can see from studies around the world what's happened and potentially minimize the harm to ourselves. Now, I'm not going to talk about vaccines or social distancing. That's been sort of talked to death, and people have made their own minds up on whether they've had that done or not. But the main thing, and this is why I've written to the Herald numerous times, bothering the editor there, is people can do stuff to protect themselves from all these chronic diseases that are killing our population prematurely. And that includes infectious diseases. It's hard to stop yourself completely getting it, obviously, COVID. It's out there now. But I wish they'd stand up at the 1 o'clock meetings and say, do these things, the public health measures, but also there are definite things that you can do to look after yourself and prevent yourself getting sick from COVID. And you can do them right now through your lifestyle actions and what you do with your diet in particular. Diet we see as central to lifestyle. What do you put in your body's fuel? It's harmful or it's beneficial. So I won't waffle on too much longer. We've got myself, Jess Campbell's very kindly written a paper on this and is going to talk from what she's discovered. And then we've got Martyn Williamson, my excellent colleague down in Alexandria, is just going to talk a bit more around plant-based diets and take you through that. And then we'll have a Q&A. Feel free to write some questions in the chat. We'll go through them towards the end. We'll take questions at the end and comments and suggestions. Everyone will have their own experience of this, and so we welcome other people's interested information on this. So look, I'll crack straight on. We're representing EBE.NZ, so Evidence-Based Eating New Zealand. I do my own lifestyle consulting as well. So for people in Auckland, if they want to come and see me, feel free to get in touch. So, with thanks to Shireen. So there are great resources around lifestyle medicine, and plant-based health professionals UK are fantastic. Dr. Shireen there is a haematologist who puts out resources relentlessly. She's probably one of most prolific writers and on this topic sift through the evidence, and I've borrowed quite a lot of her work, and it's very kind of her to lend that to us. So it's well worth having a look on her website. So SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2. So, causing the COVID-19 disease. mRNA virus, we think it came from animals, so from wet markets, from bats or intermediary hosts such as bats or raccoons, which is one reason to look at our food system, anyway. This whole thing could have started from animal agriculture or animal farming, and that should be the first message, and previous pandemics have done that, and there's a lot of information on the net about that. It gets into your lungs. Obviously, it's a respiratory airborne virus, affects the nasal passages, gets into the lungs, gets into the blood vessels and causes a lot of problems with the endothelium. I'll come to that in a bit. Affects blood clotting, immune function, platelet adhesion, can affect the heart with myocarditis, and can secondarily affect the olfactory nerves. People lose their smell and taste because it affects the endothelium there, and even the blood vessels that supply those areas. So that's the sort of pathophysiology of what we're talking about, just to remind ourselves. And look, there are lots of studies now out showing risk factors for getting sick with COVID. And this study from the US, nearly 90,000 people, from a couple of years ago now, or 18 months ago. And this is exactly what I'm seeing in MIQ. 20% of people with their hospitalizations, we've got, how many, got 1,000 people now in New Zealand in hospital. And it's probably very similar to the numbers we got here. A fifth of people have diabetes, 30% have obesity. Obesity, two problems. One, in and of itself, it's an inflammatory condition. And the second thing is it goes hand in hand with these other diseases that correlate with obesity, such as blood pressure and heart problems and cholesterol, etc. So a third of people nearly had obesity. 25% have high blood pressure. High blood pressure is an inflammatory condition of the blood vessels. It's not a natural product of aging. People in the blue zones around the world don't have high blood pressure. In fact, the blood pressure drops as they get older. So it's been shown this is a diet-related condition, blood pressure. And 11% to 12% had heart failure. So this is sort of an end-stage heart condition. So jointly, about 63%, so over 6 in 10 hospitalizations are attributable purely to these four very common metabolic, diet-driven lifestyle conditions. So, what have we got? 900 people in, so maybe nearly 1,000 people in hospital at the moment in New Zealand. Perhaps 600 of those needn't be in if these figures were similar to New Zealand's, if we had a healthy population. So potentially, preventable, but the other mission statement of EBE is potentially reverse these chronic conditions, and we'll come to that a bit later, and I think Martyn will touch on it. Similar studies from the UK, 17 million people in the Open Safely study. Then they found these risk factors, so death associations with this thing called a hazard ratio that shows your relative risk, essentially. So you can see on the list there, being male, 1.59 times risk of death. Can't change that. Your age, there's a strong age-related gradient. So over 80 years had a 20-fold increased risk in death. Again, you can't reverse your chronological age, but you can certainly improve your biological age. That's been shown many times. Deprivation, so social deprivation, these wider determinants of health, highly associated with increased risk of death, so 1.75 times there. Ethnicity, there's quite a lot's been written on this now of ethnic divides in healthcare. Black patients, 1.5 times risk of death. South Asian, very similar. But these potentially reversible conditions towards the bottom, diabetes, nearly twice the risk of non-diabetic people, severe asthma. The study didn't really clarify that, but it's obviously a chest issue that will make you more prone to getting sicker. High blood pressure, 3 times greater risk. You know, I think blood pressure is a bit of a sleeping giant. It's pretty much the biggest risk factor for cardiovascular disease, for heart and stroke disease. But it isn't, as I said earlier, it's an inflammatory condition of the blood vessels, representing inflammation from lifestyle, particularly diet. And kidney disease there, or dialysis, is a high risk as well. And again, a lot of causes of kidney failure and renal problems, kidney problems, are due to blood pressure or diabetes. So these things all tend to go hand in hand. When I see people, you know, who have what's called comorbidities, they may have several of these conditions. They're all diet related, and depending on your luck and your slight genetic assortment, you may have 2, 3, or 4 of these things. And people come in on a whole list of medications. And what we're trying to say tonight is this is potentially treatable for people if we can get people to make lifestyle changes. So weight gain with COVID. This study here showing in the JAMA journal, American Journal of Medicine, weight gain in 5 to 15-year-olds of 2.3 kilograms during lockdown, during the pandemic in the States. So increasing obesity of 5 to 11-year-olds from 36%, which is obviously extremely high already, to 45% in the study participants. So nearly half of people are classified as overweight or obese. I'd say obesity is a big risk factor for getting sicker with COVID. So big increases in the rates of obesity. Similar study with adults showing increases of weight gain of about 0.7 kilograms or 1.5 pounds every month. They call it the COVID-15 in the States, but that equates to about 8 kilograms a year, you know, if that was to be sustained. And, you know, people have been in and out of lockdowns, will have, you know, people have gained weight. So it's all counterproductive, you know, to trying to fight off COVID. And the mechanisms, well, how do these foods cause these problems? Well, from the clockwise, from the bottom left there, high cholesterols, inflammatory, high lipids, blood fats, oxidative stress from poor food choices, inflammation, this common mechanism for many metabolic diseases, affecting the gut microbiome. We know it's important to have the correct proportions of, or a healthy proportion of gut biome, which is trillions of bacteria and other organisms that we live symbiotically in our guts. And we know they're benefited greatly by a plant-based type of diet and more diversity of plants in the diet, and abnormal cell growth as well. And plant-based diets, I won't touch on this too much because Martyn's going to come to it, but there's a whole mechanism of means, or series of means that they can benefit our health. I'll skip through here. So there have been studies on plant-based diets, pescatarian diets, and COVID severity. And this one by Kim that's quite well known and quite well quoted in the science literature. A 73% lower chance of moderate to severe COVID infection on a plant-based type of diet, 59% lower chance on a fish permissible diet, pescatarian type diet. And their conclusion really was that these diets can be considered protective against COVID-19. So interestingly, on a low carb or high protein diet, it's quite popular these days, people demonizing all carbohydrates when it's really just the refined carbohydrates that should be demonized. A 3.86 greater risk of moderate to severe COVID in this study on people on those diets. So that should be a warning to people. And the famous UK Harvard study, the Zoe COVID study, from Tim Spector and his team, and Chan, etc. in Harvard. So this is sort of the future of epidemiological studies, really. You can go on your phone and you can sign up to the Zoe study. I've not done it, my brother has in the UK, and just enter your symptoms and whether you get COVID, etc. It's easy to follow. People are always on their phones, so it's really the future of collecting health-related data from a personal basis, and they're doing lots of really interesting work around microbiome and health promotion. So from 600,000 people there, they found that people on the highest quality diet, which essentially is a high plant-centered diet, not necessarily vegan or 100% plant-based, but on a higher quality type of diet, so low processed foods, relatively low animal products, or low fat animal products, less likely to develop, 10% less likely to even develop COVID-19 disease than those on the lowest quality diets, and about 40% less likely to become severely ill. Quite likely, obviously, they've been following these diets for a long time, and it just shows the potential preventative basis that they can entail. So that was the first study of diet and COVID-19 to show that the healthy diet is associated with a lower risk of developing COVID-19. And this sort of stuff should be put out every day. Do your hand washing, socially distance, etc. Vaccinate if you're happy to be vaccinated, but just look after yourself. Just watch what you're doing every day. And that's what I've been doing when I speak to the patients in the rooms. They're getting their meals from the cafeteria here. Some of the meals are crap. Generally, the veggie meals are much healthier. And I say, look, just try and eat some fruit and veggies. Get out for a walk. Because what you eat actually makes quite a big difference. Just to give people something to do. These people are sitting in their rooms 24 hours a day, watching Netflix or whatever, and not necessarily even going out. So if they feel well enough to go out, encourage them to go outside, but also watch what they're eating. Just makes people think about what they're eating and what they're putting in their mouth. We all can do it mindlessly sometimes, but food is really something that we can think of as medicine in many ways.
Okay, Mark, that's fantastic. I'm just wondering if we can hold you up at that point. We're just at time there. Of course, we're going to be coming back to all three presenters here tonight. So please make sure that don't hesitate to use the chat sequence, the chat facility, to add any questions in there if you like. Mark, thank you very much for that. Can we, if you're happy, we can move on to Jess now and hear what she's got to say. Before I do that, also, I just wanted to make sure that I introduce my co-host tonight, Catherine Barclay, who's the other side of me here. So I just forgot to do that earlier on, so I feel a bit embarrassed about that. So Jess, are you all good to go?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Just give me a thumbs up if you can see. Oh, actually, I won't be able to see your thumbs up, but just let me know that you can see this. Can you see my presentation there? Yeah, I can't see you, but I'm going to take that as a yes. Thanks. So I'm going to run through.
We can't see you. Sorry.
Yeah. Can't. Okay. Try again.
There we go.
Got it now? Okay.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about quite a few different ways to reduce the risk of COVID-19. It won't just be on plant-based diets. And really the idea is that all of these things, like what Mark was talking about, yes, they're going to reduce the risk of COVID, but also they're going to improve health more generally. And so there's really 6 areas that I'm going to focus on. With weight maintenance, obviously that's a much longer term kind of intervention. It's not something that you're going to radically overhaul within a week, but all of the other topics that I'm going to talk about are things that you can get benefits from really, really rapidly and literally within days for most of these interventions. So it's really never too late to start putting these in, especially with Omicron in the community right now. These are just some strategies and things you can start doing immediately. So in terms of plant-based diets, Mark's already mentioned a couple of the really large studies. I just wanted to draw attention to a more recent one, actually, And this was a study where they were actually weighing the food that people were eating. So it was maybe a little bit more in depth, more rigorous maybe than some of those larger studies that have come out. And what they found in this really recent study was that people who were eating over 500 grams of fruit and veg per day and more than 10 grams of nuts, just like a handful of nuts a day, actually were 86% less likely to get COVID in the first place, which is pretty staggering. You know, if you're not getting COVID in the first place, you're not going to end up really ill with it. And it's just by eating more fruits and veggies and nuts. And more generally in that study, they were also finding people that were avoiding COVID had higher intakes of water. They were getting more protein from plant sources, eating more seeds, more beans, more legumes in general, so pulses as well, more garlic in particular. And they had diets that were lower in inflammation, which again links in with all the other studies that have been done on this, where it's been shown that higher fat diets that are particularly high in processed meats are increasing the risk of COVID. So it's tying back in with those other studies. Martyn's going to talk a lot more about the mechanisms of plant-based diets and why they're so helpful. But one of the things I just wanted to touch on was the impact it has on gut health, because this is also something that's been looked at with respect to COVID-19. So probably most of you are aware that we've got this microbiome, we've got all these beneficial microbes that are living in our guts and on our skin, all over our bodies. You might not be aware though that they're actually also in the lungs, and you can see how that would be quite relevant to COVID. And so with studies that have looked at gut health and COVID, they have indeed found that people who have better gut health are less likely to get severe COVID. And one of the ways that this links in with plant-based diets is because they tend to be much higher in fiber. And we know that high fiber diets are really beneficial for that gut microbiome. So people who are eating more fiber tend to have more beneficial microbes that are protective and fewer of the harmful microbes. And you can really shift that balance very, very rapidly. In previous research that's been done where they've taken someone on a high fat, high meat kind of diet and shifted them onto a whole food plant-based diet, you can actually see a change in the microbiome starting within 24 hours. So you really can get really, really rapid benefits from this. Within just a few days, you are starting to shift those microbes in a direction that's going to be potentially helpful for general health and also for COVID. I just wanted to touch on exercise as well. This is something, you know, we all know that exercise is good for us, but I really haven't heard it talked about very much with COVID. And with lockdowns, it's something that many people will have potentially found a lot harder to get enough exercise. But really, it affects every aspect of health. So things like cardiovascular health and muscular tone and strength, but also it tends to lead to less weight, less fat mass. And it also affects things like glucose and lipid metabolism, which links into that inflammatory kind of response. So it's a whole host of benefits. The area where it may be, you know, particularly relevant right now is its potential to decrease immunosenescence. So that's just the waning of the immune system as people age. And because COVID tends to be really having a heavy impact on elderly populations, this is really relevant in that elderly populations who are continuing to exercise regularly into old age tend to have better immune responses in general. In particular, they have more activity of these cells called natural killer cells. Their job is actually to remove cells that are infected with viruses. So you can see how helpful that would be right now. Also, if you are going down a vaccination route, if that's something you want to pursue, then actually regular exercise can increase the response to vaccination in a positive way. And in general, we know from loads of previous research that's been carried out that people who are exercising regularly are less likely to get upper respiratory tract infections in general. In terms of how much exercise you need to do, most of the recommendations in all of the papers that I've been looking at recently are really focusing on you getting more than 150 minutes each week. That might sound like a lot, but actually that just works out to about 30 minutes, 5 days a week. And it can even be things like a brisk walk. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy, really. With COVID, the benefits are really quite staggering. So there's been lots of really large studies done looking at this. One in particular that I've got on the screen here was a study done in the US where they looked at 48,000 COVID positive participants. And they were finding that those people who were inactive, so who were sitting most of the day, not getting that regular 150 hours a week, 4 minutes a week, were much more likely to end up in hospital, more likely to go to ICU, and they were 2.5 more times likely to die from COVID. So pretty big effects. That study and several others since have actually found that inactivity was one of the strongest predictors of how ill people were going to be with COVID, even more so actually than things like being obese or a history of smoking or other comorbidities. So it's really, really, really important, and it's a shame that it hasn't been talked about. Further studies have just kind of gone a bit further and elucidated that a combination of aerobic exercise, so things like running, walking, swimming, cycling, playing badminton, whatever it is, and also strength training, so maybe some work in the gym or even strength-based yoga, stuff at home like press-ups, squats. Combining those two is much more beneficial than doing either aerobic training or strength training alone. Again, that's particularly important in people over 60 years old. And that same study found in people over 60 who were doing both aerobic and strength training, they were 94% less likely to end up with severe COVID. Again, this should have been headlines on every newspaper. It's huge. Just to really quickly mention, this isn't about doing loads and loads of crazy exercise. You don't have to go and do marathons. If you are someone that does a lot of that kind of stuff, like I'm actually an endurance athlete, I'm not going to stop that because of COVID, but it's just worth being aware that if you are doing that extreme exercise, your immune system will take a hit for a few days. So be a bit aware of that. If you're doing races or a lot of sport, just be a bit careful in the few days following a big effort. And sleep, similarly, it seems really obvious. We all know we should be sleeping. But again, with COVID, it has really large effects and it really hasn't been talked about. With other respiratory infections, it's been known for a long time to be really just crucial. To give an example, with the common cold, if you're sleeping less than 5 hours a night, you're about 5 times more likely to get ill with a cold. There's not been large numbers of studies done on this with COVID, but the ones that have been done have been showing quite big effects. So on the screen here, you can see just 1 extra hour of sleep a night will reduce your risk of getting COVID by about 12%, and that's just 1 hour. So if you go from 5 hours to 8 hours, you can see, that will be having a considerable effect. But in terms of getting severe COVID, the effect is much, much larger. So if you are sleep deprived, if you're getting inadequate sleep, you're 8 times more likely to end up getting severe COVID. So it's really important to prioritize this. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, lots of people's sleep has suffered. Many of us are quite anxious and stressed, but there are just some really simple things we can do that are backed by science. So there's a few suggestions here, just things like avoiding screens right before bed, so keeping your phones outside the bedroom, reducing caffeine, alcohol and nicotine. We tend to think alcohol helps us get to sleep, but actually it does reduce sleep quality. So overall, it's having quite a negative effect. Getting out in the sun in the morning, it just helps to kind of regulate your body clock and get you back into a better sleep routine. Sticking to a regular bedtime each night, try and keep it roughly the same. Keeping bedrooms cool and dark, so something like blackout curtains if you can, and just avoiding heavy meals and hard exercise right before bed, so shift them a bit earlier in the day. I would just touch on phytochemicals. These are chemicals that are found in plants. All different phytochemicals are found in different plants. So the best way to get the biggest benefit from these is just eat a wide variety of plant foods. Ideally, really, you want to be eating over 30 different plant foods each week, and that will give you the biggest gut health benefit too. But I just wanted to mention a couple specifically with regard to COVID. Curcumin, which is a compound found in turmeric, has had quite a few clinical trials, really high quality ones, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials. 3 of them have looked at more severe disease, and in the 3 papers that have come out about severe disease, they've had a 50%, an 80%, and an 82% reduction in mortality in people taking turmeric capsules once they tested positive, which again, this should have been on every newspaper. It's staggering that it's having such a large effect, and yet I've really heard nothing about it in the media. The other trials that have been on less severe disease, they're still finding that people are recovering better, they're getting less ill if they're taking turmeric. And this is something that's available in any health food shop, pharmacy. But even just eating turmeric, just adding it into curries or whatever it is you're cooking, drinking turmeric juice and having it with black pepper, which helps the absorption, it's going to be beneficial for health. Turmeric is very anti-inflammatory, antiviral, so it's a great thing to be including in your diet. And just quickly to mention another one, quercetin, which is a flavonoid. It's found in things like onions, asparagus, apples, red leaf lettuce. There's not been as many trials with this, but some pretty impressive reductions in hospitalization and length of hospital stay so far have been found. So again, it's just worth considering and knowing about. Briefly, micronutrients. I think people are a bit more aware of the role of vitamin D because there has been a little bit of media interest in this. There have been so many papers published on this. And I think it's really been underplayed. But the figures that I'm giving you on the screen are from a meta-analysis. So this is like an average of lots of different papers taken together. And they found that in people who started taking vitamin D after they tested positive, after they got COVID, there was an 88% reduction in severe disease in those taking vitamin D. So huge benefit. And in general, there's lots of studies now that have shown that people are at very much increased risk of getting COVID, getting severe COVID and dying if they are deficient in the first place. And so really just making sure you're getting adequate vitamin D, going out in the sun being the obvious way to do that, or through supplements if needed, is really beneficial with COVID. Just to very briefly mention, vitamin C and zinc are also really critical here. There's quite a few studies that have shown people who are getting more severe COVID tend to be deficient in vitamin C and zinc. So including lots of those from dietary sources as much as you can, or again, just having some zinc lozenges in the house so that if you get COVID, you've got something on hand is likely to be really beneficial. I know we're almost out of time. So just briefly, I think thinking about time in nature, because of lockdowns especially, it can be really helpful to think about this. It hasn't really been looked at that much with respect to COVID, but there's a whole body of literature from the last kind of decade or so now that shows that just spending a couple of hours in a forest has a really beneficial impact on the immune system, and it boosts these natural killer cells again. That benefit actually lasts for several days. So even if you can just get out into a forest for a walk once a week, that's going to boost your immune system, as well as doing things like reducing stress, lowering blood pressure, reducing inflammation. And so it's having a really wide-reaching effect on health generally, but particularly with the immune response right now, that's really helpful with COVID. It doesn't have to be forests, it can be other natural spaces. So going for a walk by the sea or lake, whatever it is, just getting out in nature is going to be really beneficial. And lastly, Mark mentioned about the impact of obesity already. Again, we know it's got lots and lots of problems associated with it. This isn't particular to COVID, associated with various other chronic diseases. It was already known to be a risk factor for flu, and indeed it's been shown to be the same with COVID. And there's many mechanisms, but one of the things to maybe be aware of is that fat cells actually can be like a reservoir essentially for the virus. So it can be quite significant. And indeed, it has kind of turned out that in the countries where obesity is more prevalent, there has been much higher mortality from COVID. And you can see that you are much more likely to be getting infected, more likely to be hospitalized, and more likely to die from COVID if you're obese compared to a normal BMI. So it's obviously not a quick solution, but it's really something to think about over the longer term. So really, what I want you to realize is that a lot of these things are really quick. Weight management is the only one that's a bit longer term. All of the other interventions here, you can get benefits from pretty much immediately within days. So you can implement that at any time. They're generally free and really easy to implement. And all of these things, yes, they're going to improve your protection against COVID. And if COVID continues to mutate, you'll still have that protection, but they're also going to improve general health. Those are just a few references. It's not exhaustive. I can send a proper reference list if anyone does want to access the papers.
That's That's fantastic, Jess. One of the things I think I was a bit remiss in was actually describing what your background is. I know that you're an independent researcher. Can you give us a little bit on your professional background?
Yeah, so I'm a biologist. At the moment, I'm in the final few months of finishing my PhD, which isn't on COVID, but because I was looking into the literature a lot and just saw that there wasn't really a comprehensive review bringing this all together, I took a couple of months out of writing up the rest of my PhD to put a paper together actually looking at this. So it's going through peer review at the moment. But yeah, essentially I'm a biologist by background, and my PhD is kind of looking at the effect of diet and behaviour and environmental conditions.
Excellent, thank you. Could I ask the two speakers that have spoken so far to go through the chat and look at the questions that are there, so that we'll talk about answering those questions soon. Now, Dr. Martyn, are you ready to go?
Sure. Jess, if you could stop share screen and I'll start sharing. Just look at. Oops. So, what should I eat to minimize my COVID risk? And we've just had two really interesting talks from Mark and Jess, and I'm going to talk to you about plant-based nutrition and what makes up healthy plant-based nutrition. And just a couple of wee pointers before I start. As Jess has said, the impact is really quick, and even in weight, a lot of people will actually start losing weight. So within a few weeks, you can have weight loss of several kilograms. And depending on your starting weight, if you lose about 5%, you're making a major difference to your risk. And the two logos, Life Strong Health, that's an enterprise that my wife and I have set up, and it's similar to Mark at True South Health. We offer individualized advice to people if they wish on lifestyle measures. And then there's EBE NZ, and EBE's mission is to get this message out to people so that they at least know. That blurb on there tells you a little bit about me. So I'm a GP and vocationally registered academic and a senior lecturer at the Department of General Practice and Rural Health. And as you can see, I'm trained in lifestyle medicine. So whole food plant-based nutrition, this is what it's about. And it consists of eating only or mostly the following food groups. That's fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. Now, all of these are positively associated with health. And if you choose to eat only from these food groups, so you're whole food plant-based, you are going to get the maximum benefit available to you in the shortest possible space of time. So what is whole food plant-based eating? Well, another way of looking at it is that the whole food refers to the complete fruit or vegetable. And if it's processed, the whole food is used with nothing else added. So we haven't put any additional sugar in or oils in. We haven't taken away beneficial fiber. And plant-based, it's a humorous way of looking at it, means the food doesn't have a mother. So this is a slide of traffic lights, and if you look at for plant-based nutrition or whole food plant-based nutrition on the internet, you'll come across the traffic light system. This one I've lifted from Jenny Cameron and Malcolm Mackay, who are two excellent plant-based practitioners in Australia. Plant-Based Health Australia is their website, a really informative website to have a look at. So green means these are foods that you can eat as much as you want of, and improve your health. So we can see here intact whole grains, legumes, which are, you know, beans and so forth, starchy vegetables, non-starchy vegetables, green leafy vegetables, and I suggest you stuff those in as much as you possibly can. Mushrooms, fruit, and fruit's really beneficial, herbs and spices. And we just heard from Jess how valuable spice like turmeric can be. And so those are what should be making up the bulk of your pantry. Yellow light foods are ones that we just recommend going with caution so we don't overuse those, and there's a variety of reasons for this. So if you mill whole grains, you're then getting refined carbohydrates, which unfortunately have some harmful effects, and the same with pastas. So make sure if you get a pasta that you've got a whole grain pasta, or perhaps one that's been made directly from pulses. Soybean products such as tempeh, tofu can be a little heavy on the fat, which has implications for those who are wanting to lose weight but are otherwise healthy. Nuts and seeds, again, in terms of plant-based foods, along with avocados, are relatively calorie dense, but much less calorie dense than some of the animal foods. Dried fruit, if you dry your own, yes, that's great. Commercial dried fruit tends to have sugar added, so just watch out for that. Plant-based milks, again, if you make your own, no problem. If you purchase those, try and get the ones without sugar. Food companies desperate to add things to make you want to buy more of them. So they'll add sugar, make stuff sweet to encourage our sweet tooth. Condiments and coffee. Now I put salt in there, and I recommend that if you want to add salt, you use the iodized salt. And if you're eating whole food plant-based, you can kind of follow your taste buds here, because you'll be having a lot less salt by cutting out all those processed foods. Red light foods are ones that if you want to get the maximum benefit, that you don't touch. So we've got the refined grains, alcohol. So I think Jess referred to some of the deleterious effects of alcohol, and some recent work has definitely confirmed there are, unfortunately, because a lot of people like drinking a bit of alcohol, no beneficial effects from it at all, but only harmful effects. Same with the animal-based foods, dairy, eggs, processed meats, particularly harmful, red meat, poultry, fish, shellfish, fake meats and cheeses, oils and margarine. So I just want to focus a little bit on those ones at the bottom there, fake meats and cheeses, and often come and be labeled vegan, and you think, great, these are plant-based. Actually, they have a negative impact on our health. So the Harvard Plant-Based Index, which I think was used in that study that Mark talked about, gives positive scores to things in the green light and negative scores to things like fake meats and vegan cheese, etc. So I just want to differentiate whole food plant-based nutrition from vegan. So if you look at this slide carefully, you'll see a mixture of whole foods, and you'll start to notice some processed foods. I'll just give you maybe 10 seconds to have a run your eye past this and see if you can work out which ones are likely to be adding to our health and which ones we should be avoiding. And then I'm going to remove those less healthy vegan foods. Everyone had a go? Right. So there we are. So that's all that's remaining from that slide. And all of those foods that I showed before were vegan. So clearly we're not talking about vegan food here. We're talking about whole plant-based foods. And I'm just going to fill this up with acceptable alternatives. There we go. So you can see it's kind of a riot of color, isn't it? And really tasty. And one of the wonderful things about when you switch to whole food plant-based nutrition, which I did, because I wanted to talk to my patients about it once I discovered it about sort of 6 years ago, was that rather than being hard to do once you've made the switch, it's actually easy. And the food is so tasty. My goodness. Just looking at this stuff makes my mouth water. In the bottom left corner of this slide, you'll see a couple of processed items. There we've got the plant-based milks, which aren't a proper food. We just use them to fluid in our muesli and perhaps on the porridge. But there you also see some balsamic vinegar. So I hope that gives everyone a clear idea of the kind of foods that we're talking about here. And these are some of the dishes that you can make. Now, please don't ask me what on earth these are. I couldn't tell you, but I've eaten most of these foods, and as I said earlier, they're really, really tasty. So if you're wanting to maximize your chances with COVID, you need to get started on a kind of upward spiral in health. And Jess has really neatly outlined in her talk the benefits of a whole lot of other lifestyle measures. And one thing you'll discover, and I've noticed in patients of mine who've switched to whole food plant-based nutrition, and yeah, people do switch, is that those other things become so much easier. If you eat these foods, you'll feel more energetic. You're going to feel more like going out for exercise. If you start exercising regularly, lo and behold, you'll find that you sleep better. And if you're starting to exercise more regularly, then you can take yourself out and put yourself in nature, as Jess was suggesting, or certainly you can around my way because I live rurally down south here in Alexandra. And if you live in a city, then a walk in the park, and most cities in New Zealand have parks that have just the same effect, and that's been shown in the literature. So we'll have a quick look at why whole plant foods create health. So we've heard about fiber and the healthy gut microbiome and the positive effects that has on immune function. It improves bowel health and your mood, which is also great for immune function. All of these things are just so interlinked. And it also importantly regulates the absorption of sugars and fats. And free sugar and free fats are probably the bane of the modern diet and result in us eating maybe 500 calories more, 300 to 500 calories more on average per person than we were probably even just 50 years ago, which accounts for the rising levels of obesity. They contain the phytonutrients, so antioxidants working against that oxidative stress that Mark was talking about, and they have antimicrobial and anti-cancer effects too. So they're packed with nutrients, which give you increased health and nutrition per calorie. So makes absolute sense eating this way. Of low calorie density, so you can fill yourself up and get a lot fewer calories than you would if you ate another way. And we heard about the inflammation of our blood vessels leading to or being part of these diseases which contribute to increasing our risk from COVID. And if you eat plenty of leafy greens and beets, then you're going to assist the cells that line your blood vessels remain healthy and produce something called nitric oxide, which keeps the blood vessels nice and smooth and supple. So how does all of that work? Well, I just mentioned helps the lining of the blood vessels, also helps new blood vessels grow appropriately. That's of relevance in type 2 diabetes, particularly, especially I think of the problems that people get behind in the backs of their eyes, where the blood vessels just grow out of control and we lose vision. And importantly, you'll reduce inflammation in your body, and which makes a massive difference. So at the moment in the Western world, the majority of people are walking around, even those that look healthy, with a grumbling low-grade inflammation, and that's the body's response to stress. And if you've got that low-grade inflammation, you are much more likely to get the heart disease, the high blood pressure, the type 2 diabetes, and develop weight problems that put us at risk from COVID. You're much more likely to suffer problems from COVID when you get it. So we really want that inflammation dropped right down. So whole food plant-based nutrition that we promote with EBE NZ has you eating totally non-inflammatory foods. And importantly, when we heard about the risks with age, these help our cells stay young. So people who are living a healthy lifestyle and eating healthily will have cells which look younger when you examine them under the microscope than younger people who don't have the healthy lifestyle habits. So just a reminder, what are we talking about? Whole fruits, whole vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. So if I were to test you all at the end of this talk, hopefully you should all at least have that: whole foods, whole vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. When you go to the supermarket, that's what should be going into your trolley. So some special considerations when I'm talking about plant-based nutrition. It's really important that it's calorie sufficient. So we're not talking here about only eating tiny amounts of it. You will lose weight and feel better eating a calorie sufficient diet and feeling full from whole food plant-based nutrition. And that's really important to get all the health benefits. Has to be wide ranging, so we want you to eat the colors of the rainbow. You saw those pictures of the foods, the reds and the berries and tomatoes, yellows, greens, purples, and whites. You want all of those to get the maximum benefit. Large quantities of leafy greens. You can't have too many leafy greens, basically, and the more that you have, the healthier you'll be. If you're doing this long term, it's really important that you take some B12 supplementation, which you can take by mouth, unless you've got a problem with absorbing it. And I put in here vitamin D supplementation. Now, we heard from Jess how important that is with regard to infection. And it doesn't matter what diet you're eating in New Zealand. We have probably on average, the population is low in vitamin D. So I recommend that you have vitamin D supplementation, at least during the winter months. And you, as long as you're outside in the sun, in the summer, for maybe 20 minutes, covering your arms and legs and face, or maybe up to 50% of burn time, you'll be making. Just do that a couple of times a week and you'll get stacks of vitamin D. You want to include regular consumption of omega-3 fat sources such as ground flaxseed, walnuts, chia seeds, and have that on a daily basis. Again, that's anti-inflammatory. And iodine supplementation is important. It's important for every woman who gets pregnant in New Zealand to have some small amount of iodine supplementation, because it's largely a little bit deficient in our foods. Plant-based, you can get it from seaweeds, but if you're adding salt, make sure it's iodized. So if you're breastfeeding or pregnant, then you want that iodine supplementation. So that's it from me, and open to questions. I do have a couple more slides, but felt in the interest of time, Peter, we should move on and hear from the audience.
Can I ask a question? Absolutely.
Absolutely, yes. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we're hearing you.
Yeah, hi. My name is Shireen, and I have a question in regards to salt. Two questions. The first, when you say iodized, we've always been warned not to have iodized salt and to use other alternatives like Himalayan, the pink salt. And then the other question is, and this is just I'll take you back to the initial stages of this session. You, I forgot his name. It was advised that social, there's a contribution to getting COVID was because of social deprivation. Can you just elaborate on that, please? Thank you.
So, a comment on that one.
Yeah, sorry, Shireen, can you just repeat that second part of the question? The first part about salt. Yeah, I mean, salt's slightly divided amongst the experts. Most people say you don't want to be, we get a lot of salt anyway. There's so much in our processed food. You know, most of us can't avoid processed food completely. Bread is one of the biggest sources of salt, you know, or supermarket bought bread. Two things: one, it can put your blood pressure up, and two, it makes you eat more food, more calories. So that's you know, the food technicians, food industry's way of making you eat more food. So you know, given blood pressure is such a prevalent condition, really common, and we get a lot of incidental salt, and there's enough sodium in our natural plant-based foods to get enough salt. So, you know, I normally say to people, if you want to add a little bit on top of your food to make you or your family or whoever, you know, more likely to eat that rather than something far less healthy, then that's probably absolutely fine. I was out with dinner with someone last night who has very low blood pressure, so they can be more permissive with their salt. But otherwise, we actually don't. You know, I guess the thing about iodized salt is if you're going to add salt, it's good to put some iodine with it. But overall, we'd probably say generally don't add much salt to your food. You do go through this neuroadaptation where your taste buds become more aware of the natural flavors of food. Once you change to a more sort of simple, I suppose, less SOS, salt or sugar added diet, your taste buds and neuroreceptors upregulate. So actually, you know, I was out last night having a pasta meal in a restaurant, and it's highly salted, the food. It's really sort of potent and pungent, and you really notice the difference. So I don't know if you've heard any other sources that you can comment of where you got that advice, but that would be probably the standard advice from the plant-based section. And sorry, for your second question, I'll just ask you to repeat it. And
thank you for that. My second question, I think I've just heard one of the factors that contribute to getting COVID was the lack of socialization. It was within that context, or social deprivation. So I don't know if I've misheard that, but I've picked up on that, and I find that really interesting.
Sorry, was that from one of my slides or something you just read?
No, it was just from the gentleman who just spoke, and I'm sorry, I'm really bad with names.
From Martyn, yeah.
I can make a comment on that. Social connection is an important determinant of health. So being able to relate to other people, having folk that care about you, and having people that you care about contributes to health. So I suspect that might be where you've got that. Heard about that sort of data. For example, in a study of people who were long-lived, including those in the blue zones, the feature that one anthropologist came up with mostly was actually that's the social connection, that was the most consistent factor in terms of longevity. So it is really important. However, that doesn't mean that it's the only thing. All of these things that we've talked about are important, and nutrition, such as plant-based, is hugely important. When I mentioned salt, I may have given the wrong impression. Remember, it was in the yellow light section, so go cautiously. So, for example, we've got iodized salt in our house, and we don't have the extra salt from processed foods. We hardly have any of those. So, how many times would I add salt to? We add salt to a meal, be once a month if we're lucky, and then it's just a tiny amount. But I prefer that it's iodized, because then you've got the iodine in it, and that's why governments have encouraged salt to be iodized to help the general iodine levels in populations overall. There's a good couple of good questions there, though.
I was just going to add as well, I have seen quite a few studies that have mentioned the social deprivation factor being a risk factor for COVID. Usually it ties into other things. So generally people coming from a lower socioeconomic background, might have less access to healthcare, or a poorer diet in general, or maybe less likely to be active or to be getting out in nature. It tends to correlate with lots of other things, so it's quite difficult to tease apart why exactly, but it generally does seem like a lot of that comes from those other kind of diet and lifestyle factors.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In the first study I showed, the UK one, they controlled for all those variables, so they could tease out the contribution specifically from deprivation. Took it away from gender and medical diseases and comorbidities, and they still found a 1.75. There's probably lots of hidden factors in there. That are all related that it's hard to measure for. We know poverty and having less means increases stresses and impacts in people in lots of different ways. All these things sort of go hand in hand, don't they? Good question from Libby there at the bottom about, we'll just pick off a few questions. If anyone, the speakers, wants to just pick a question off as they go, and just you can comment on. Healthy food so expensive. Yeah, I mean, that is the perception sometimes. However, these plant-based foods are the cheapest on the earth to produce. The expensive stuff is the labor-intensive, resource-intensive animal agriculture food. So if you look at the price of meat, fish, even dairy, except for things like milk, because it's produced obviously in such large amounts. In the supermarkets, these things are relatively expensive compared with, if you look at grains and beans, these are the cheapest foods in the world. That they say eat like a peasant. So eat the simple foods. These areas in rural China and Japan that have been shown in really good quality studies, that people eat rice and veggies, and get sufficient protein, and they have some of the lowest disease rates in the world. If you read the China study book from Colin Campbell, people are eating very simple foods, and it's really when they go through the urbanization and westernization of their diets that they then start eating lots of meat and dairy and processed foods. So when I talk about people about foods, I'd say processed foods are a big problem, and a lot of those things are plant-based. So not good enough just to be plant-based, you have to eat natural whole foods. And the other thing is, we know that the public health consensus now and the weight of studies show Western world eats far too high preponderance of meat and dairy in their diet. It's been very, very clearly shown. And that increases things like saturated fat and inflammatory TMA, TMO and TMAO, and all these other sort of inflammatory molecules, and people gain weight. And get all these awful diseases. So it needn't be expensive, I think, is the bottom line. Fruit and veggies, obviously, it's a big issue. If I say to my patients, shop around, go to the fruit and veggie stalls. You don't necessarily go to the supermarket where it can be expensive. Choose seasonal, choose local if it's cheaper. But the basic grains, beans, starchy veggies. I mean, how much are spuds? You can eat them until they come out of your ears. So that is the perception, but it's been shown in many studies, and there's a TV program on it, isn't it? Eat healthy for cheap, or whatever it's called. That this stuff can be, I think it's more the education. I think it's more knowing how to cook and what to cook, and having the time, probably the time and resources to do it. I think they're as big barriers, as well as the marketing of these unhealthy foods. People are bombarded by it. And we had Boyd Swinburne talking on one of our webinars a few months ago. He spent 35 years, spent his entire career putting out policy documents of how to improve people's health, and the obesity epidemic's only got worse. How disappointing is that if you spent your career fighting against it? And now he's with his healthcare coalition, Aotearoa, he's focused on just three things. One is improving education to kids of what healthy foods are. One is stopping marketing to kids of unhealthy foods. They've done it in the UK quite well in response partly to the COVID and obesity epidemic link. They put out this big obesity document and also some policies on stopping marketing to kids. So that's the second thing. And the third thing Boyd's trying to get done, and have a look on his website, is get a sugar tax. Some of us might say it might include a fat tax or a salt tax or something like that, but it's a start, because lots of these unhealthy foods are actually plant-based, like sugar, but they're just refined. So there's refined plant-based foods and there's whole plant-based foods, and this stuff is bad for you, and the whole foods are good for you.
Mark, just on the Facebook Live, we've got Jessica asking, would a growing teen need vitamin D as well? Was that Martyn that was talking about that, or Mark?
I think if the COVID situation, you'd probably want to cover yourself with some vitamin D, but otherwise, it's not something that I would necessarily do. The vitamin D probably gets more important as you get older. And just if I could make a quick comment on the cost of whole food plant-based nutrition in New Zealand. There was a study done on some people in Gisborne who went whole food plant-based to improve their health, and as part of that study, they actually looked at the average grocery cost per week, and it actually dropped by maybe $8 to $10 per week per person. So it can be done. If you eat whole food plant-based, then you can do it probably for less than, you can imagine, the standard diet that people were on in Gisborne, where there's lots of fast food and so on.
That's great.
I just add as well, one really good tip for doing this a lot more cheaply. I'm a student, so I'm always on a budget. I started sprouting a lot of my own greens, and you can get sprouts for pennies. You can just buy seeds in bulk from online or somewhere like Mighty 10 or Warehouse. And then you've got a constant source of greens. You can just grow them in your kitchen, and they really don't need much effort at all. It's literally 30 seconds a day, just water them. But that's a really good way to save some money on some sprouts.
That's an awesome tip. Yeah. One other question. Could you please talk a bit about how much plant-based protein on an average adult needs per day?
Whole food plant-based, you eat a calorie sufficient diet, and you're having a wide range of plant-based foods, you'll have easily enough protein. In fact, you probably have more than you need. And the problem in our society at the moment is that we're consuming far too much protein as a proportion of our diet, and that those proteins are largely animal based, and unfortunately they have some deleterious effects. And so there's been plenty of work which illustrates that. There are figures on the how much protein does the average person need per day. I can't remember the exact figures off the top of my head, but basically I don't even think about that, and I certainly recommend to people not to actually think about that, but just to follow the basic instructions. If we're eating whole plant foods and follow the rules, we'll keep ourselves healthy. Man is the only animal that starts to worry about where protein comes from, where fat comes from, and so on and so forth. And it's kind of being given an artificial, being brought to prominence artificially, I would say, in the media. So absolutely no worries there at all. And especially if you're an athlete and you're exercising, so if you're doing what Jess is doing, she's going to require more calories. And as she has those extra calories, she's going to be getting the extra protein. The calorie-rich plant-based foods like beans and legumes, for example, full of fiber, full of protein. And so as the calories go up, then so does your protein per kilogram of body weight. And you'll have, and this has been shown, you'll have more than enough.
Yeah, great answer, Martyn. Yeah, it takes care of itself if you're eating a sensible variety. You try and eat from those four groups: fruits, veggies, whole grains, and legumes. The legumes, pulses, beans, chickpeas, lentils are the highest source of them. So if you've got a bit of protein, if you're phobic about it, you can just bulk up a bit more on those. So 0.8 grams per kilogram is probably quite a quoted amount that people need. So if you're 70 kg, that's about sort of 55 or so grams of protein a day. If you're really fussed about it, you can go on Chronometer and you can measure your daily, input your daily foods, and it'll tell you how much protein and how much your macro and micronutrients. Yeah, when you're growing, you'll need a proportionally more, calories and protein potentially, but it sort of takes care of itself, really. If you're on a really silly diet, plant-based diet, whole food, like with lots of fruit and veggies, it's possible you could, not get enough protein, but you'd have to be eating a pretty, I'd say, kind of not very nice diet, not very satiating diet, I think.
And it would be unlikely to be calorie sufficient. So it's where that calorie sufficiency comes in. So don't starve yourself if you switch.
If you're building muscle, if you happen to be a bodybuilder, the quoted rates are slightly more, 1.2, 1.4 grams per kilogram. And Jess, you do a lot of sports, endurance stuff, probably more than me really these days. You might have looked into it a bit more, but it does tend to take care of itself.
Likewise, it takes care of itself, really. I've gone through phases. I think when I first went more whole food plant-based and when I was training for my first Ironman, then I looked at it a bit more and I actually tried to hit particular targets. These days, I just don't even think about it, and I've never had any problems. I mean, for context, I just did a 10-hour swim over the weekend. I do a lot. It's just never been an issue.
With 30 kilometers. Well done, Jess.
Thanks.
And I mean, she obviously trained for this quite heavily. Did you lose much weight, or did you just keep chowing? Did you just keep eating?
I mean, I'm tiny anyway, so I don't have a particularly high calorie requirement compared to most people doing that. So no, I stayed about the same.
Quite efficient. Yeah.
Just another comment on the nutritional value of plant-based diets. there's a guy in the UK, Alan Desmond, he's probably running the study now, but he was putting together a study on plant-based nutrition and inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And what he did was he got some chefs who didn't know anything about plant-based nutrition to come up with whole food plant-based meals, which they duly did. And then he thought, oh, well, I have to make sure that these meals, if we're putting our participants on these tasty meals that these guys have come up with, better make sure that they're, got enough nutrition in them. So he got a dietitian to look at these meals that the chefs had come up with. And the dietitian said, when she'd done her analysis, yep, not lacking in anything aside from the B12. So that wasn't the chefs thinking carefully about, oh, we'll have a little bit of this and a little bit of that to make sure that the diet's satisfactory. They just were creating recipes that were going to be tasty, and so I think that really illustrates the point. Have the wide range, calories sufficient. So if you're like Jess and you're doing sort of ultra endurance stuff, you'll be consuming a lot of calories. You'll need a lot more than someone who's relatively sedentary, and you'll get all that you need as long as you follow those rules that I put up earlier.
Mark, if I can just, come across to everybody again soon, but Ron, I was just trying to lost his name here. Ryan Wolf has asked a question, will we be able to get to hear the rest of your talk? Now, I'm sorry, I was aware that I cut into your talk there, but what I'm just wondering, is there any other special points you'd like to cover about your talk, Mark? Or, would it be a possibility that we can get your talk done, so we can do a presentation again, even if yourself or Martyn or anybody else wants to do a session?
I've got about 3 more slides.
Okay.
Shall I bung them up?
Yeah, let's start.
I'll stick them up. We can have a chat. And the other guys could reply in the chat there to some of the questions. There's one on K2. I've just put, for Deirdre, I've just put a reply there about K2. Thanks, Abe. Great to see you here, Abe, tonight. There's this conjecture around K1 to K2 conversion for vitamin K1 to K2. So it's a bit unclear, really, of how efficient that is. The only good plant-based source is natto. Well, the main one is natto fermented soybeans. Occasionally I buy it from Harvest Whole Foods. It's actually it's really umami tasting thing. It's high in K2. Otherwise, it's actually hard to get them from plant-based sources. And that No Meat Athlete page. So Matt Frazier is a sort of science-based research athlete, and he's got a good page on, B12 is the one mandatory one, as Martyn mentioned, but there are a few other optional or potential ones to take, depending on what your diet's like and how good you are at taking flax and chia and walnuts and things like that. So you can have a look at that article I've just put in the chat there on other things. It's got things like vitamin D in there, iodine, selenium, these other things, so if you're pretty good with your diet and varied, some plant-based experts say you don't need to take any other supplements, but there is this thing about taking, for insurance, once you start worrying about it, you think, oh, I better take a supplement in it because, you don't want to be deficient. You can go too high in some, vitamins, minerals. Mostly the plant-based ones are not too harmful. Obviously, getting it from food, your body will sort it out. It'll absorb what it needs to, and it'll not absorb what it doesn't need to. But I'll stop waffling. I'll just chuck a few of my own slides up because I found that actually quite interesting, just stuff that I've found. Let me just get back to where I was. Here, if I share the screen again, and everyone else can have a look in the chat for a second. There we go. So I'll max it out. Yeah, so there's this thing about thinking about COVID-19 as a vascular disease. So even though it goes through the lungs, its effects on the blood vessels are one of the major things. How it sort of translates into illness. This thing called the endothelium that Martyn mentioned, the inside lining, if I go forward and back, I'll show you in a second a picture of it, of your blood vessels. You've got 60,000 miles lining the inside of your blood vessels, and we thought these were just like a barrier really to stop blood getting out and that kind of thing. Now we know it's a really active part of our body. It helps regulate the immune system and white blood cells and immune particles, inflammation. We know the inside of your coronary arteries and other blood vessels around your body, if they get inflamed.
Matt, can you expand it? We've got, yeah.
Oh, was it very small?
Yeah. You haven't made it a slide yet. We've still got it in.
Oh, sorry, I haven't got it played yet. Sorry, I'll bring it. There we go. Too polite, Kath. We know that inside of blood vessels gets damaged quite easily, and in certain parts of the body, that's what causes inflammation in your blood vessels. You start to get inflammation and macrophages and cholesterol buildups and oxidized cholesterol, and then you have a heart attack or a stroke, or you get peripheral vascular disease and problems with your legs. So this endothelium, the inside lining of all your blood vessels, it's just one cell thick, and it releases lots of immune mediating particles, but nitric oxide is a really important one. Some chap won the Nobel Prize for discovering nitric oxide. It's this potent vasodilator. We want our blood vessels to be open. We want them to be flowing wide. We don't want them to be closed and shut in general. And we want to do that in a natural way rather than necessarily just blood pressure pills. So in conditions that predict a worse outcome from COVID-19 are characterized by endothelial dysfunction, so damage or inflammation of this endothelium, this inner lining. So high blood pressure, you're getting this high pressure through your through your tubes all the time, and that can cause damage. Heart failure is similar. Kidney failure and type 2 diabetes, these all have endothelial dysfunction. So inflammation or damage to the inside of the blood vessels, and that's probably why these conditions predict a greater morbidity, illness, and sickness with these conditions. And at the bottom there, it's got a list of conditions that it can contribute to immune dysregulation. And the thing that I've sent people into hospital with many times, acute respiratory distress syndrome. So it's where the arteries or the blood vessels, the capillaries lining the lungs become inflamed, and then they become leaky, and then you get fluid in your lungs, and people go through this dry drowning, essentially, where fluid from their own lungs is leaking, from their own blood vessels leaking into their lungs, and then they can't transfer oxygen inefficiently. And Dr. Esselstyn there at the bottom, who did the reverse heart disease studies, has talks about the endothelium on and on and on. And eating green leafy vegetables, it's nitrate-rich diets, help enhance the ability of our body to produce nitric oxide and dilate blood vessels. So not a great picture, but you can sort of see the inside lining of blood vessels there, 3 layers to blood vessels. And it can affect all these parts of the body. High cholesterol, just coming to that, interesting. High cholesterol is associated with a high saturated fat diet, high cholesterol diet, lots of meat, dairy, egg yolks. This thing called ACE2 it's a normal molecule present on cell membranes, and it helps regulate blood pressure. So blood pressure pills affect this molecule. So ACE inhibitors sort of inhibits molecules that dilate blood vessels and reduce blood pressure. But it also is how SARS COVID-2, the virus, gets into cells. And it's been shown that cholesterol loading inside cells and in the cell membranes themselves, if you've got higher levels of cholesterol, it enhances virus entry. It sort of mediates the ability for it to get inside the cells. So that's why there's these studies on statins, potentially people on statins, cholesterol-lowering drugs, could be prophylactic or preventative. It's a little bit unclear, but the studies sort of indicated it might be against how severe the virus might get. You could do that, or you could eat a plant-based diet, and not just eat that saturated fat that increases your cholesterol. and cholesterol itself. And a little diagram at the top there, just sort of demonstrating how it facilitates cell entry. High blood glucose, so this thing called insulin resistance that we know that we get from diet, pre-diabetes, diabetes, and COVID severity has all these been demonstrated to have all these effects on the body, impairing the immune system, facilitating binding of the virus to this ACE receptor on the cells, so the virus can get in easier and replicate inside cells. High glucose has been shown to impair the function of the immune system itself, and increase the risk of an exaggerated response, leading to this thing called a cytokine storm. You know, people get this multi-system illness, multi-organ failure. You get these thing called cytokines, these inflammatory molecules, or generally inflammatory molecules that, you know, go crazy, haywire, and people get a bad, you know, bout of COVID and get very ill. And they're the people who end up in ICU, you know, on ventilators and renal support and all these things. So good way to lower glucose. If you have a look at that link there, plant-based diets, Neil Barnard's shown how to, you know, reverse insulin resistance. And these guys called the Mastering Diabetes people are excellent. Cyrus and Robbie, the two people with diabetes in the States, are probably two of the world's leading people on reversing diabetes and with plant-based diets. So Mastering Diabetes is the book. It's really excellent. Really good studies as well on gut microbiome. We've talked about it already, so I won't harp on about it too much. But having a more beneficial balance of gut biome organisms, and it's been demonstrated in several studies now. And a really good article in the BMJ just saying that it seems clear from the data available that nutrition is one of the keys to global pandemic resilience, both for current and future pandemics, to reduce the burden on healthcare. Optimal nutritional status is a defense against both communicable and non-communicable diseases. So COVID will come and go, but all these conditions are still continuing. So, you know, share this video with people. Tell, you know, if you've got people who are a bit anxious, worried about getting COVID, or got conditions that, you know, make them more prone to getting a bad dose of COVID, then feel free to share this video. We're not saying everyone must go vegan overnight or anything like that, but if we can shift people to just along that paradigm towards a more plant-heavy diet, that's really what we're saying. And if you're to push us, we'd probably all say, look, probably the optimal thing is to, you know, fully go to a plant-based diet. We know the blue zones around the world, and I'm going to come to that in just a minute. Like Okinawa have very low rates of mortality. So these are the longest lived places in the world. The healthiest, longest lived people have most number of centenarians, like Okinawa in Japan, the Mediterranean, Costa Rica, etc. And mortality from COVID-19, you know, as of June in 2021 was 0.08%, compared with 1.3%. So that's about 1/16 of the rate of death in the Okinawans. And you know, a big proportion of their diet is plant-based. They eat a small condiment of meat or fish, or pork or something, not every day as the condiment of their meals, but they're largely plant-based. The purple potato, very high in antioxidants and phytonutrients, you know, is something like 60 or 70% of their diet. So it's very likely that their diets played a big role in this.
Mark, can I just ask a question here? What I was wondering, Mark, is there's a question there from, I'm not sure how to pronounce Deepti's name, so forgive me for how I pronounce this, but her question just simply says, you know, post-COVID-19, has there been a shift in people's attitude towards plant-based diets? She said, when I went plant-based 8 years ago, it wasn't very well received. It was and sometimes still continues to be looked at as just another fad diet. So has there been any noticeable shift in the perception post the pandemic? And so I'd put that to yourself, Mark, and also to Jess and to Martyn, you know, because it's a critical thing that really EBE is trying to focus a lot of effort on, is to actually raise this awareness of the value of plant-based eating. And in fact, really, Martyn, was the point of the letter that yourself and Grant Dixon, our chairman from EBE, who's here tonight, signed in a letter to the Minister of Health. So the question is, are we really altering this perception of plant-based eating? Can anybody, can we start with you on that one, Mark?
Yeah, I don't know how many studies there are. If you ask me, say, what is science on it? My perception, and it's always hard because we're all in our own echo chambers, is that it is. I get more inquiries. I read about it a lot more in, public press, etc. It's open to anyone. Yeah, I mean, it's out there, isn't it? It's in restaurants. I think probably the biggest thing is, I think probably partly from health, but from the environmental point of view, I think it's becoming more and more. We were talking about it last night, electric vehicles. If you'd said 5, 8 years ago, 10 years ago, talking about electric vehicles, people still laugh at you and say, they're just funny cars that, just go a couple of miles down the road. And now they're becoming the norm, for people who are able to, obviously it costs a certain amount, but, and I think it's the same thing with plant-based diets. I think, they've been around now long enough that they're starting to creep in, and it gets to this critical mass where then the balance tips, and it's it becomes almost not the new norm, but it becomes first they laugh at you, and then they get angry, and then they accept it as perfectly obvious. And I think we're sort of going through that stage still. Yeah, if you look on the wrong sort of Facebook pages, you'll Farmers Against Vegans or whatever, you'll see a lot of resistance to it, and you think, well, we've made no shift at all. But I think we were talking about it yesterday. There are people who always vote Labour, always vote National, and there's always group in the middle who are open, interested people who can swing both ways. And they might go from a conventional sort of meat and veg type diet, and there's a plant-based diet over here, and there's probably a lot of people in the middle who are starting to shift towards a more plant-based type of diet. Perhaps not necessarily just for health reasons, but perhaps for other reasons. There's a big article in the UK yesterday about do 6 things to change, because we're talking about health here, but the environment. And one of those things obviously was a move to a plant-based diet or shift in that direction. Other things were reducing your consumer purchases, number of clothes you buy, flights you take, your vehicles, your transport. So my perception is I think there are studies out there. I think if you look at Veganuary, they get bigger every year, and they do sort of research into this sort of thing. If you look at the amount that people are buying of plant-based substitutes, I think we frown upon the mock meats and those things, but I think for some people they are a stepping stone in the right direction. I'd rather eating an Impossible burger than a meat burger, even though the health benefits are, not half as great as if they were having a whole food plant-based patty or something. So that's my perception of it. If anyone in the crowd tonight has got any comments on that, I'd be interested to hear if they want to talk about what their experience is. We're all obviously probably relatively interested in plant-based diets here, or our health. But I don't know, Martyn or Jess or anybody else has any comments on that.
Yeah, I'll make a comment, Mark. Look, without a doubt, in let's say take the USA and UK, for example, there are many more people now eating plant-based than there were before, but probably they would be classified as vegan. And as it as explained, vegan foods aren't necessarily doesn't necessarily equate with health. So I think Mark's right. And just if you go out for meals now, nearly everywhere will offer some sort of vegan option, whereas that wasn't the case. This is in New Zealand. That wasn't the case. That wasn't the case before, a few years ago. So that's changing. But I don't know if we've got New Zealand figures. But in terms of acceptability scientifically, there was a major piece of work published in 2019 called the Eat Lancet report, which looked at planetary health and individual health. And what they concluded was that 100% plant-based diet was satisfactory, with up to roughly about 15% of calories from animal foods being acceptable in terms of maintaining, getting the best options for healthy people worldwide, and our best chance of planetary health. So it's starting to shift. All the big studies on nutrition show a clear benefit for plant-based nutrition. I saw there was a little comment from someone in the chat about a study somewhere that showed that meat eaters did better, and I don't know how big that study was or where it was from. I haven't come across it. Probably supported by the meat industry, I would suspect, which means that they've kind of cherry-picked data. But the overwhelming weight of evidence in the nutrition world is on the side of plants and health versus animal foods.
Okay, there's a question there, just near the bottom. It says from Linda, I think companies have hijacked the plant-based term, which can include unhealthy foods, and it's hard to find WFPB eating out. Look, I might just put a little plug in there, Linda. The thing is, in this particular issue that's coming up with the magazine, we're featuring a whole food plant-based cafe that is out in Dargaville. Now, the curiosity that exists here is that I think your point that you make here is very right. I think we need to be clearly featuring where people can go and eat and safely eat whole food plant-based, because it is quite an issue. I think probably all of us can identify with it. That we go through a menu in a restaurant, we can be quite suspicious of it and that. But I feel that what we'll try and do is pull more information together on just what cafes, restaurants, and that are serving what we understand to be fully whole food. Something that fits the whole food plant-based mantra and what we're talking about. We would certainly, as a magazine, be interested in knowing if anybody knows of those restaurants, so please pass that information on. So yeah, sorry about that. Anybody else, Jess, or anybody else would like to make a comment, please?
I was just going to agree about how much easier it's been over the last few years. It is so much more widely spoken about being whole food plant-based. I mean, when I went vegetarian and then vegan for ethical reasons originally, like 20 years ago, and you couldn't eat out at that point at all. It just, no one knew what you were talking about. So it's changed so much. And I saw a couple of papers kind of raising this with respect to COVID, saying, why are people so resistant to going whole food plant-based? Like, why is the medical community not pushing this more? So it is being talked about. I think people are starting to say we need to push this more. So it's changing, which is great.
Yeah, and I think from a sustainability point of view, it's going to become a public health issue. A lot's been written on this in the British Medical Journal now about climate change and its effect on health, population migration, and crop failure. It's all tied into each other, so it's almost hard to disentangle them now. Some people are obviously completely into it for personal health reasons, and that's great. It doesn't matter really if you're improving reducing your carbon emissions and ethically, obviously those things that are affected. I think eating out, yeah, I say if I'm going, I went to an Italian restaurant last night, the vegan food, but I asked for whole food, so I asked for low oil or no oil, and lots of veggies. So don't be afraid to, I think some chefs might roll their eyes, or waiters, waitresses, but you know, if you've got to go somewhere with someone to a restaurant, you can phone ahead and say, can you do something that's plant, but you know, ideally low oil, and cram in the veggies. So it was pizza and pasta last night, and you can get them to dump on the veggies and you know, bulk up that side of it. So don't be afraid to ask off. It comes from consumer demand, these changes. So you know, if we all go into places, even you know, going to a steak restaurant, you know, they'll often have a vegan option these days, because there'll be some vegan who goes along with the, you know, the meat eaters. So don't be afraid to, you know, and I think we've got, you know, that confidence comes from the fact it's so prevalent now. Demand follows, you know, requests from us, so people will change. You know, that's the big thing. It's a bit like electric vehicles. These plant-based foods will become more prevalent. See a comment by John, and feel free to speak up, John, if you want to have a chat as well, about the UK obesity rates after Boris Johnson publicly announced people would recover better from COVID if they could reduce their weight. Well, I was reading the paper last night. I could put a link in the chat. They did. They were. I think they were going to do this anyway. They put out this big anti-obesity paper, and a lot of it was focused on because it would improve your COVID outcomes, because they were really frightened that, I mean, obviously a lot of people did die, but it was going to be even worse, and they've got to do something about this. I'll put the link in the chat for the paper. It was interesting because it made them think. It sort of made, you know, it's brought it to people's attention that a lot of people are just surviving on the margins of their health, and it doesn't take much to tip them over, and bad dose of COVID, and they're knocked over, and they're the people who are dying in the hospitals. You know, well, we had 60 or 70 people die. And these are people who are just being kept alive by pills and healthcare, you know, interventions, and they're just knocked over the edge. I mean, it's a bit like the flu. People die. People on the margins of health die, you know, each winter. But I'll put the link in there.
Martyn, you know, you've sent us a message to say that you have to leave. I realise that we're now well over time. Martyn, thank you very much for your contribution this evening. It's really been appreciated. And I don't wish to hold any of the panelists on any longer than what we can. You know, we've gone, you know, we're something like now 45 minutes past the 8:30 time almost. You know, it's 12 minutes past 9. But what's that? What was that? You want to come in and say that? Yeah, the other thing I think we'd just like to do is just simply, Catherine's reminded me here, is that we'd like to, you know, just you mentioned the members of evidence-based eating here. I'm wondering, if Catherine, if you could just, you know, refer to that, because we have got several members of evidence-based eating here tonight, and we really appreciate them being here. So, you know, thank you, Martyn, and obviously we will grab you again on the rounds again. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Can I just make a couple of quick comments before I go? I just wanted to say, look, if anybody is watching who's not plant-based, who wants to make the change but is struggling, then go to the EBE NZ website, go to Mark's website, go to ours, look at Plant-Based Health Australia, and you'll find access to resources that will help you make the change.
Details in the chat. And can I also, sorry for the interruption, the slides that you guys have shared was really, really fruitful. If you can just leave that as well, so everyone else can benefit from it, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, we'll be happy to do that. We can put them up on the EBE website. That'd be great. Yeah. Feel free to share them around. Yeah. Thanks, Martyn. Peter and Kath, or Jess, I don't know if you've got anything else you want to say, or anyone else?
Just the EBE team that we've got here tonight. You know, we've got Dr. Mark Craig. He's on our committee. Yeah, Peter and I are both on it. We've got Grant Dixon, who's our chair, and I think Karen is here tonight as well. So if I missed anybody, I think that's here. And don't.
Yeah, and
Martyn, who's just left as well. But there is others, but I think that is all that is here, unless I've missed someone. Please do say if I have.
And we've got many members with us tonight as well.
And many members, of course, too.
Great yeah. And feel free. We have these plant-powered pods. We're going to see it's a monthly potluck meeting with a bit of an education part to it and a bit of social stuff to it, to support people really socially and to see what other people cook and eat and share information. We're all students of this area. It's something none of us were sort of born into, so we've all had to sort of develop our knowledge. So no question too silly or too interesting or sophisticated really. It's all interesting stuff. I'm learning each week, and I learn from other people and following my sort of heroes in this area who've sort of trailblazed. But if you're interested in this area, please do feel free to join us or come along to the potluck in Auckland, or we've got one in Christchurch and New Plymouth. Obviously it might be off for a month or two just while the peak of the pandemic goes through, but we love to see people. We've got such amazing stories of personal turnarounds. We know we need more studies in plant-based nutrition, but they're gradually getting more and more. We believe obviously there's enough there to go to a plant-based diet now, or move in that direction. But Peter's story, if you haven't heard it, and the stories you publish in your magazine each month are really profound, far greater than anything I've seen in 25, 30 years of medicine. Really, what you put in your mouth and how you live your life really makes such a profound difference, far more than all the pills and procedures that I can give or recommend to people. So we love to hear from new members and put events on or speak. So please feel free to join in. Okay, Peter, I'll leave it to you to not usually lost for words to probably close the meeting unless we've got any other.
I think maybe we can wrap it up here, guys. Thank you very much for coming along. Thank you, Jess, and thank you, Martyn, who's now left, of course, and thank you, Mark. Thank you to everybody who has participated. It's been really, really useful and really interesting. There'll be a link going up on this webinar, and we'll continue to work on doing these sort of things because what we feel is there is a critical need to keep pushing the information out. Thank you for coming along, everybody. And if there's one final question that anybody's just burning to bring out, then please, please let us know. And or if there's any other information that you think we should be working on and presenting, please message us at any time. We're keen to hear from you.
I've got one request. We've got a special needs son who's just gone into care, full-time care, and we're having a major challenge on diet for him. He was on basically a plant-based diet prior to going in, and I was wondering if it would be okay if we could take the slides from tonight to the place where they're looking after him. It's actually up in Fonterey, because we're pushing them down a more plant-based diet, but it's the resistance also from the staff who have to make the food and things like that. So it's not just persuading the organisation to take it on, but it's also the people that actually deliver the service themselves, the carers and so on. And I was wondering if it would be okay to do that, and whether we could actually, if this helps, they actually start to respond to it, whether we'd be able to engage with you guys to, do some education on it.
Most certainly, Clinton. What I think here is that this is a specific situation that maybe we need to talk about offline, and where perhaps people like Mark or Grant specifically as well could be of direct benefit to you. Grant, did you want to say anything?
Yeah, Clinton, can you just send to info@ebe.nz? Just a note along that line. I'll try to get the slides off Mark and Martyn and Jess, and I'll email them to you. But if you can email me, and if those two people, and I'll talk to Martyn as well, could pass on your slides. I'm assuming you don't mind passing on your slides. I will facilitate that for you.
Okay.
So
No, I'll do that. Thanks.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. The thing about this too, Clinton, is that we have got a doctor up there in Whangarei who is a member of the committee. She's not here tonight, but obviously I don't want to commit her, but I understand the battle that you're going through, and I'm sure Grant and Dr. Mark and that would be happy to assist you with any steps you want to make in that direction.
I'll drop you Mandy's line too, so you could maybe talk to her in Whangarei. She's a doctor up there.
Okay, thanks. Mark, maybe at the next pod, I'll catch up with you.
That'd be great. More the merrier. Yeah, it's great. We're trying to have it next Saturday. I'm sort of in two minds actually, whether it will be able to go ahead. We'll have a chat about it and hopefully it'll go ahead. But if, actually, we might do an RSVP if we put a Facebook, depending on who's on Facebook, RSVP on Grant. Do you think that's?
Yeah, well, you could do that, but we'll put out a Auckland newsletter next Thursday for the Saturday with the last minute decision on it.
Yeah, yeah.
You can always do a personal message me on Facebook, or just send me an email again at info@ebe.nz. That will get to me, or Grant Dixon at whatever.
Okay, excellent. Thanks.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Great to see everyone. Thanks, Peter and Kath. It's great.
Good night. Thank you so
Awesome.
much for
Thank
that
you, guys.
wonderful,
Keep eating
session.
plants.
Have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. That was really,
that's
really
great.
enlightening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shireen.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night.
night, everybody.
Good night, Bob.
Late job, boy. Yeah.
Good night, guys. Thank
Good
you very
night.
much.
See you, Penny.
Great to see everyone.
See you, Russ.
Bye.
Thank you, Jess.
I was just going to say, I'm going to head to bed, but I'll send you the slides in the morning if that's okay.
Oh, not a problem. Not a problem. Thanks, Jess. Yeah.
Thank you.
Good
Bye.
night. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.